Hello, hello. Do you hear me? Please confirm on the chat box. Yes, that's great. Thank you very much. Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Depends on the time zone you operate. So my name is Marcin Maciąg and I'm co-owner and CEO in Laboratory PETSDiag. We operate in Poland, in Europe. And our main service, main test is EHAA tests. So EHAA tests is tests which result has been developed based on the results of many scientific studies conducted using the inductively coupled plasma optical emission spectrometry with the Optima ICP-IOS. It's a non-invasive diagnostic test that gives the most reliable results of the levels of and proportions of nutrients and toxins that occur in animals, in this case horse coat. So by performing an EHAA test, we are able to control and regulate the biochemical balance and mineral nutrition of the body of our horse, the factors essential for the health and shape of our best friends. And our test is in really close relation with the topic of our today's webinar, which is Detox Your Horse. And the host of today's webinar is Donna Nelson. Donna has a degree in biology and has spent over 20 years working with animals. She started with exotic animals at zoos and then changed career path to working with horses. She's worked with rescue horses from Primerian farms in Canada, rehoming thoroughbreds of the racetrack, and finally top-level dressage and combined driving horses. She recently was diagnosed with mold toxicity from living with her horses in Oregon, which began the journey to learning about detoxification pathways and how minerals and heavy metals interact in both human and animal bodies. I'm very proud that Donna cooperates with our laboratory in the US, and she's one of our partners in this country. So I believe that today's webinar will be very helpful in understanding how we can help detoxify our horses. So Donna, welcome, and please connect with us and run your webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Martin, and welcome everyone. So today I just want to take you through a few ways to detox your horse from heavy metals. First, I'm going to go through why your horse needs to detox and some potential ways that your horses are being exposed to heavy metals that you might not know about. So just to jump right in. So heavy metals are naturally occurring elements. Their multiple industrial, domestic, medical, agricultural, and technological applications have led to their wide distribution in the environment, raising concerns over their potential effects on human health and the environment. Their toxicity depends on several factors, including the dose, the route of exposure, and the chemical species. They also depend on the age, gender, genetics, and nutritional status of the exposed individuals. They're known to induce organ damage even at low doses. So when you're talking about heavy metals, even like low, what you might think of mild exposure, is generally not a good thing. Toxic heavy metals come from industrial exposure, such as coal smoke, metal smelting, exhaust fumes, landfills, chemicals, chemical fertilizers used in agriculture, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, albicides, old lead or metal water pipes, old metal water tanks, mining and most commonly from water supplies, particularly bore water, which is also known groundwater that has been accessed by drilling, which would be like in the States, we call that well water, especially in California, we have a lot of well water. So any water that you have to get to from drilling is bore water. Toxic heavy metals are also components of jet fuel exhaust and used extensively in geoengineering. And for everyone outside of California, our phenomenal wildfires every year release tons of toxins, including metals, into the atmosphere that then spread around the world. So you are welcome for that. Horse feeds and hay grown on soils that are constantly treated with chemical fertilizers, pesticides, fungicides, etc., contain varying levels of toxic metals such as cadmium, lead, aluminum, mercury, arsenic, and nickel. Heavy metals prevent the absorption of nutritional elements such as calcium, magnesium, potassium, cobalt, sulfur, and trace minerals, making the soil sick and the feed grown on them nutritionally deficient. So the purpose of soil analysis is to discover what, if anything, you need to add to the soil to properly nourish the plants growing on it. Many horse owners do not consider the health of their soil in relation to the health of their horse. Increasingly, horse owners fail to conduct regular soil tests and therefore fail to apply regular applications of lime. The lower pH soils have difficulty coping with heavy metals, particularly aluminum. So how do we prevent how do we prevent feeding contaminated feed to our horses? So a good way is to try to feed certified organic feeds and avoid GMO ingredients, because GMOs are usually heavily laden with pesticides and fungicides. Buy from mills where only horse feed is manufactured to prevent cross-contamination with cattle feed. And some horse feeds include seaweed in their products. Seaweed can be contaminated with arsenic, lead, and aluminum, so ask for a certificate of analysis from manufacturers that are using seaweed in their feeds. So now I want to just kind of give you guys a brief overview of the heavy metals. The heavy metals tested for in the EHAA test include aluminum, barium, cadmium, lithium, nickel, lead, which I actually forgot to put on this slide, so good job me, strontium, and vanadium. So I'm just going to run through each toxic metal to give you a brief overview of what fun things each one does to the body. And I mean fun in a very sarcastic way. So aluminum is one of the most common sources of heavy metal toxicity in horses, along with arsenic. It can accumulate in the kidneys, the brain, the lungs, the liver, and the thyroid. It's a well-established neurotoxin, and in humans, it's directly linked to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And it can also replace calcium and phosphorus in the body. Aluminum is also used as a vaccine adjuvant. So if you've ever had an inoculation or your horse has ever been inoculated for anything, it's likely been exposed to aluminum. Barium is very common in jet fuel exhaust and is used for geoengineering as well. Geoengineering goes by many names. It's called cloud seeding, it's called chemtrails, it's called basically anything that has to do with weather manipulation. They're using heavy metal particulates to do it. So there's heavy metals in the air because of all of these activities. So we're exposed to heavy metals that way, basically without knowing it. And your horse, basically lives outside all the time. So they're going to have higher levels of some of these metals than we would, because they just don't get a break from it. So toxic levels of barium can cause breathing difficulties, increased blood pressure, heart rhythm changes, stomach irritation, muscle weakness, changes in nerve reflexes, swelling of the brains and liver, kidney and heart damage. Lithium is used in the manufacture of aircraft batteries, and it's also used as a drug in humans to treat mental illness. There was a study done on lithium that found low levels of naturally occurring lithium in water supplies, and they correlated that to lower suicide rates in that area, which is how it became a drug to treat mental illness in humans. Toxic levels of lithium can cause nausea, diarrhea, dizziness, changes in heart rhythm, muscle weakness, fatigue and dazed feeling, fine tremors, frequent urination, and increased thirst. So nickel is actually is a metal that is needed in very, very small amounts, and it can be beneficial to horses in those small amounts, but increased levels can cause decreased growth rate, weight loss, accumulation in kidneys, muscle tremors, and rough coat. Nickel is also one of the ingredients basically found in enteroliths removed from horses. And if you don't know what enteroliths are, it's basically like an intestinal stone that can form in horses' intestinal tracts, and it can block their intestinal tract and actually be fatal if they get large enough. Some horses have really small ones, and they don't necessarily cause problems. Some horses can grow like giant ones, and those are the ones that can cause problems and can be fatal. Cadmium is also found in batteries, and grazing animals can consume significantly elevated levels of cadmium if fed forage grown in soils that have been repeatedly exposed to phosphate fertilizers. So again, it's very important to know what's going into the soil where your feed that you're feeding your horses comes from, because all of these things can affect what your horse is consuming. So cadmium is also obtained as a byproduct of smelting other metals like copper, zinc, and lead. Zinc deficiency has also been shown to promote the accumulation of cadmium in the liver, whereas iron and copper deficiency raise cadmium intake by the kidneys. Cadmium is a toxic metal with a half-life of 10 to 30 years that antagonizes zinc. Supplementation with copper and zinc has helped to prevent against the adverse effects of cadmium. So all of these minerals and all of these metals interact with each other and can sometimes replace each other, which is why it's really important to have the test results and know what your horse is low on and what your horse is high in, so that you can help balance that system. Lead causes gastrointestinal issues like constipation, abdominal pain, and bloating. It can slow down kidney functions. It can damage neurons and interfere with neurotransmission, and which decreases cognitive functions like memory, learning, and visual motor performance. Strontium is found in varying levels throughout the world in the soil. The natural form of strontium is a salt form, and the salt form is safe with no reported side effects when consumed at reasonable doses. However, it does replace calcium in the body. There is a radioactive version of strontium, and this is the damaging part. It's formed in nuclear reactions or during the explosion of nuclear weapons. Radioactive strontium isotopes are also used as delivery agents for chemotherapy drugs and for diagnostic purposes in humans. There's one question in the chat: would a horse that has a microchip have a higher level of aluminum and lead? That's possible. I actually don't know what the ingredients for microchips are. but it is possible that they would have a higher level of that stuff. So at the end of this, we'll get to ways that you can help your horse detox from these. I do need, like I said, I don't know what the ingredients for those microchips are. I would have to look that up to be able to tell you definitively. I can tell you that I think it's possible, but I don't know that for sure. So vanadium causes stomach discomfort, diarrhea, nausea, and gas. It can also cause a greenish tongue, a loss of energy, nervous system issues, and kidney damage. And vanadium is one of those compounds emitted from jet fuel. So you're kind of always getting vanadium, whether you know it or not, if there is an airplane flying overhead. So that's a bit about the heavy metals, just kind of a brief overview on some of the horrible things that they do. Every horse now has an individual nutritional needs that changed according to many factors, including age, exercise level, the seasons of the year, and underlying conditions, which can also be called comorbidities. And I know if you live in the US, you've probably heard the word comorbidities more times than you'd like to admit in the past 18 months. So every cell in the body is like a tiny battery dependent on minerals to function. I'd just like to briefly touch on each of the minerals needed by the body and give a brief overview of their functions. I emphasize the word brief because the information I'm sharing today is just barely scratching the surface of of the science behind how the body works. So the macro minerals are those minerals the body needs in larger or gram amounts. These include calcium, phosphorus, sodium, potassium, magnesium, and sulfur. I should also note that mineral and element are interchangeable in this context. So calcium is one of the most well-known minerals and likely makes you instantly think of strong bones and teeth. You're correct in thinking that, thanks to marketing, but calcium has many more roles in the body. Calcium is integral to the proper functioning of muscles in the body, which also includes the heart. It also helps regulate the excitability of nerves. It's important to note for working horses, calcium is required as an enzyme cofactor for the breakdown of glycogen to release glucose as an energy source. The level of calcium in the blood is carefully regulated. When the levels drop, parathyroid hormone is excreted from the parathyroid glands and triggers the release of calcium from the bone. It also increases the retention of calcium in the kidney, which means less loss in the urine. When calcium levels are too high, a condition called hypercalcemia, the hormone calcitonin is released and has the opposite effects of the parathyroid hormone. Calcitonin is produced in the cells inside the thyroid gland called C cells. A small note about vitamin D and calcium. In other species, vitamin D is also involved with calcium absorption, but horses and oddly rabbits are unique. Their ability to absorb calcium from their diet is quite high, while their circulating levels of vitamin D is very low. So it appears that horses do not regulate intestinal absorption with vitamin D the way that other species do. And this likely explains why they have very high amounts of calcium in their urine. So I know I'm not the only one that does this, but if you've ever watched your horse urinate, that really cloudy, white, milky appearance of their urine, that's calcium. So as most horse owners are likely aware, the consensus is that the most bioavailable form of calcium is from alfalfa. And bioavailable, if you don't know, just means able to be absorbed by a living organism. So both phosphorus and magnesium levels influence the uptake of calcium, which is why it is so important to make sure that your minerals are as balanced as you can possibly make them. So just like calcium, phosphorus is also an important mineral in bone. Along with the nitrogen group, phosphorus can replace one fatty acid in fats to produce phospholipids. Phospholipids are an important component of cell membranes and can assist in normal fluid balance in the cell. Phosphorus can also similarly be incorporated into proteins to form phosphoproteins. Many cell enzymes, cellular receptors, and cellular signaling molecules are phosphoproteins. DNA and RNA contain phosphorus, and it's also a critical component in ATP, which is the energy storage compound. Phosphorus is absorbed in both the upper and lower small intestine, the dorsal colon and the small colon. It's not as vulnerable to interference with absorption as calcium is. Very high aluminum intakes can interfere with phosphorus absorption by binding it in the intestinal tract, which upsets the phosphorus-calcium balance in bone. Calcium in excess can decrease phosphorus absorption, just as high phosphorus can decrease calcium absorption. So this mechanism is not well understood, but again, it speaks to needing to balance your hormones. So, like other species, salt intake increases absorption of calcium and phosphorus in horses, which leads us to sodium. So the cation sodium is the major electrolyte or free ion circulating in the blood, along with the anion chloride, the cation potassium, and the anion bicarbonate. I hope you guys are taking notes. There's going to be a test later. Additionally, phosphate and sulfate groups circulate as anions in small groups, as do small amounts of free ionized calcium and magnesium. Sodium as a component in electrolytes is involved in a variety of body functions, including the production and secretion of sweat, saliva, intestinal tract fluids, urine and mucus, heart contraction, intestinal movement, and other involuntary smooth muscle contraction, skeletal muscle contraction, nerve function, maintenance of normal acid-base balance, which is pH, and maintenance of normal hydration, which is very important considering the body is 70% water. The full scope of sodium's job in the body is quite complicated as well as fascinating, but the takeaway point is that maintaining normal levels is critical to performance and basically life itself. So when it comes to sodium, you're better off offering too much than too little, as excess sodium can be excreted in the urine. Most equine diets are naturally very low in sodium, especially if forage is the primary source, which is why it's always highly recommended that you either top dress your horse's grain rations with some source of sodium, whether it's salt or a mineral block or whatever, or offer a free choice mineral block so that they can get enough sodium, because sodium is lost in sweat. So for working horses, it's very important to make sure that they have enough. The difference in sodium versus potassium concentrations outside and inside the cells is the basis for excitability of muscle and nerve tissue. High intakes of potassium from the diet are normal, and excess potassium is easily excreted by the kidneys. Low intake of potassium can be seen in the nervous system and especially in the muscles. Symptoms of low potassium include irregularities in the heart rhythm, muscle weakness, spasm or tying up, which is also called rhabdomyolysis. And if you've ever done CrossFit, you know all about that. Fatigue, slowed to absent intestinal function, nerve irritability, and even paralysis. Hyperkalemia, or too much potassium, is extremely rare, and it's likely only found with end-stage kidney failure, massive muscle damage, or in the genetic disease HYPP. The symptoms of high and low potassium are actually basically the same. The last point, insulin drives potassium into cells that are sensitive to insulin, which is why insulin sensitivity is so important. The vast majority of the cells that insulin drives potassium into are the skeletal muscle tissue. So that, again, that's why insulin sensitivity is so very, very important. Magnesium is involved in so many aspects of the structure and function of the body that it's virtually impossible to think of anything that doesn't involve magnesium, according to Dr. Kellen. One of the most important functions of magnesium is to control the movement of calcium along calcium channels. Calcium channels form the basis for all excitable tissue activity, which includes the nervous system, the heart, skeletal muscle, and smooth muscle in the intestinal tract, the uterus, the urinary tract, and blood vessels. It's also required for the production and storage of the ATP that is needed by sodium-potassium pumps to do their job of clearing the calcium from the cell and putting it back into storage sites. The symptoms of low magnesium are similar to the symptoms of excess ionized calcium. The symptoms include irritability, hypersensitivity, muscular symptoms from twitching to spasm, with the potential for GI symptoms and heart irregularity when severe. Horses with moderate magnesium deficiency are often misdiagnosed with EPSM, which is just a hereditary glycogen storage disease that causes exertional rhabdomyolysis. Other clinical symptoms include gait disturbances, including stilted gait, base-wide gait behind, and difficulty controlling the hind end when turning, and reluctance or inability to canter. So animals have no known requirement for inorganic sulfur or nitrogen. The horse's requirements for sulfur-containing amino acids cysteine, cysteine, methionine, and taurine are supplied through plants. Plants are the intermediate processor between inorganic sulfur and organic sulfur in the form of amino acids. The sulfur you will see on a hay analysis is primarily the organic sulfur inside the amino acids. So skin, hooves, hair, and collagen, which is a major component of connective tissue, including tendons and ligaments, are rich in sulfur-containing amino acids. The amino acid methionine can be used as the sole source of sulfur amino acids in the horse's diet, or you can do a combination of methionine and cysteine. You usually don't have to worry too much about too little inorganic sulfur in a horse's diet, but you do have to worry about too much. There's a potential for sulfur compounds to pull out copper and selenium before they can be absorbed in the intestinal tract. And just a little note about MSM. It's a very popular supplement currently on the market, which claims to have beneficial effects of improving skin, hair, tendon health, etc. These claims are still a little bit questionable. A few clinical trials have demonstrated an analgesic and anti-inflammatory effect of MSM on arthritis, bladder inflammation, and some skin problems. And analgesic just means a pain reliever effect. Other studies have found beneficial effects of controlling inflammation and analgesic effects at higher doses. So my issue with MSM is that it's marketed as being 100% non-toxic, which is a lie, because nothing is completely non-toxic, even water. You have too much at one time and you're going to die. So, there's little to no information available on how MSM interacts with the absorption of other minerals, and should therefore be treated like a drug when giving it to your horse. And just a side little anecdote, I was feeding MSM to my horse before I had him tested with the EHAA tests, and his sulfur was off the charts. So he doesn't get MSM anymore. So the microelements are the minerals these elements are referred to as micro because they're needed in very tiny amounts by the body. They're measured in micrograms as opposed to the macro elements, which are measured in grams. So while more is not necessarily better, skipped ahead. More is not necessarily better, but minimal is not necessarily optimal either. So you finding the right balance for your individual horse is key. Copper requirements for horses are very low, but it is a very important mineral. It has many more functions than the few that I'm going to cover here, but just a few of them. Copper is involved in the final oxygen consuming step of energy generation in the mitochondria and is therefore essential to life. It's also responsible for the production of the pigment melanin. Congenital absence of copper causes albinism in humans. Copper deficiency in horses can cause a rusting of darker coats, and this is seen in black horses that fade to red, and also in red tips on darker manes and sun bleaching of darker coats. These horses usually respond well to copper supplementation. Copper is also required for enzymes that produce norepinephrine from dopamine and manufacture the phospholipids contained in the myelin found in the protective nerve sheaths. So it's also integral in the process of iron metabolism. Copper-containing enzymes convert ferrous iron to ferric, and ferric iron is the only form that can be bound to the carrier protein transferrin, which delivers iron to the tissues, including bone marrow, for incorporation into hemoglobin. Another consequence of copper deficiency is anemia, and copper deficiency is actually a much more likely cause of anemia in the horse than is iron deficiency. Which brings us to iron. So, because humans are regularly deficient in iron, this is bled into the equine world, and we're inundated with iron supplements for our horses marketed as blood builders. Iron is included in most commercial feeds and vitamin mineral supplements, often in very generous amounts. Calcium and phosphate inorganic minerals commonly used in feeds are hidden sources of iron, but usually those are in minute amounts. But again, it just shows the need to check your horse's feed and check the analysis on all of, like, basically on everything in your horse's feed, because these manufacturers, and I want to believe that their hearts are in the right place. They're trying to offer, complete feeds and feeds that are nutritionally balanced for the horse, but horses horses in general may not have the same requirements that your individual specific horse needs. So it's always good to check, and always good to balance your horse's diet to their individual needs. The soil is also an important bioavailable source of iron in most places in the world. This is why foals raised in stalls have low iron versus those raised in pastures. So iron is quite possibly the most oversupplemented mineral in equine diets. It's difficult to find a diet that is deficient in iron even before supplementation. The saying that more is never better is especially true for iron, because excess iron could cause a predisposition to infection, secondary zinc, and possibly copper deficiency. Also, it causes a predisposition to arthritis and increased risk of tendon ligament problems, which, as we all know for horses, is never a good thing. Liver disease and altered glucose metabolism, including insulin resistance and overt diabetes. And just for extra points, insulin resistance and diabetes also increase iron absorption, so it becomes a vicious cycle. There is small amounts of iron that are secreted in the sweat from horses, but the rest is stored in the liver. And for people, the only known treatment for iron overload is bloodletting. So manganese forms the core of an antioxidant superoxide dismutase enzyme located inside the mitochondria. Again, there will be a test later. I hope you're taking notes. It is a cofactor for enzymes involved in proteoglycan synthesis, so central to the formation of cartilage and the connective tissue skeleton of bone. It's a cofactor in gluconeogenesis, which is the manufacture of glucose by the liver, and in the release of insulin by the pancreas. It's also involved as a catalyst in the metabolism and transformation of fats and proteins, including the synthesis of cholesterol. It's still a poorly understood mineral, both in horses and humans. Manganese deficiencies are very rare. Iron may substitute for manganese in the superoxide dismutase enzyme. Excess manganese may worsen iron's toxic effects by reducing the number of available binding sites on ferritin. So very low amounts of selenium are needed in the horse's diet, but it's a very important mineral. There are concerns with selenium, or there are concerns over too much and too little of selenium. So this is one that's very, very important, that you need just the right amount. Selenium is found in soil, or it should be found in soil. Through modern farming practices, most of the United States is now deficient in selenium, and in most places. Alkaline soils will have an adequate level of selenium. Acid soils inhibit the uptake of selenium in the plants grown there. So selenium is one of the few minerals where testing of the horse can give an accurate picture, more so than testing the hay. Selenium is an extremely potent antioxidant and plays an important role in protecting cell structures and cell membranes from the effects of oxygen-free radicals produced during energy generation. Selenium is therefore most important for tissues with high aerobic metabolism activity, like brain and nervous system, the heart, and the skeletal muscles, along with rapidly growing tissues. Adequate selenium intake is very important for exercising horses. And finally, selenium toxicity is a very big concern. The first symptom is often hair loss, followed by foot pain that can progress to sloughing of the entire foot. A garlic or a DMSO like odor to the breath is also an early toxicity symptom. Zinc is one of the most common nutritional deficiencies. Structures on proteins called zinc fingers allow them to bind to DNA. In enzyme systems, zinc is essential for pigment formation, transport of carbon dioxide in the blood, bone building and remodeling, and insulin production and release. Zinc is also a messenger. Release of ionic zinc by cells is one way that cells in the nervous system talk to each other. It also plays an important role in antibody formation and infection fighting, especially viral infections. Symptoms of zinc deficiency include poor coat, mouth ulcers, skin flaking, poor hoof quality and ridging, poor fertility, mild anemia, suboptimal immunity, and predisposition to skin infections. High iron intake reduces zinc levels, and high in this case are the levels commonly found in commercial feeds. High copper intake also presumably lowers zinc levels, and high zinc levels create a copper deficiency. So again, all of these minerals work with each other and in place of each other, which is why it is so very important to make sure that the mineral levels are as balanced as you can possibly make them. Silicon is currently kind of a trendy supplement with claims that it can just about solve and cure joint and bone problems. But most of these claims are based on somewhat questionable research, where a group of young horses were supplemented with silicon and they showed fewer injuries. So the researchers interpreted this as a silicon deficiency. But what they didn't account for was that as the silicon intake was increased, the silicon levels in the urine also increased and calcium excretion decreased. So all of these horses were also fed really high amounts of grain, which is known to increase urinary loss of calcium. So by blocking these calcium losses in the very young and the growing and the heavily exercised horses, this was likely the reason for the supposed benefit from the silicon instead of the actual benefits from silicon. Chromium, plants take up chromium very readily, except in very alkaline soils. Most soils are adequate in chromium levels, and some are even too high. Chromium enables insulin binding to receptors, and in very high doses, chromium can have an insulin-like effect and stimulate glucose uptake directly without the presence of insulin. So now let's get into a little bit of the detoxification. So there are several ways to detox from heavy metals, both directly with substances like chelators and indirectly by supporting the immune system and allowing the body to detox itself. Balancing minerals is a great way to help the body a great help to help the body rid itself of harmful metals. So a few of the herbs that will help detox: cilantro, Chlorella vulgaris, rosehip, nettle, milk thistle, dandelion, and goldenrod. There's also the homeopathic Thuja Occidentals, and then kelp and seaweed are also good at helping detox and support the immune system. So for cilantro, cilantro is a well-known chelating herb, and chelators are just substances that bind to heavy metals to help the body flush them. Cilantro is especially effective on aluminum, mercury, and lead. And just as a side note, the essential oil of cilantro is also very effective at helping the body to detox. So you don't actually have to feed the herb cilantro. You can use the essential oil if your horse doesn't want to eat cilantro. Chlorella vulgaris. Many studies have shown chlorella's ability to detoxify the body of pesticides, herbicides, radiation residue, and heavy metals. The high chlorophyll content in chlorella helps the body to flush toxins, and chlorophyll helps to cleanse the liver, the blood, kidneys, and digestive tract, which improves overall health. So chlorella is kind of a neat one because it does both things. It actually helps flush the toxins out of the body, and it also helps support the immune system in the process. And one really cool thing about chlorella is that as well as helping to clean out heavy metals, chlorella also helps to keep out heavy metals. If you're going to feed chlorella, it needs to be a cracked cell wall chlorella and from a reputable source. So when you open the bag, it should smell very fresh. If it doesn't, then don't feed it. And if you don't get the cracked cell wall, your horse can't access the minerals inside that cell wall, so it's basically useless. The one caution about chlorella is that it's very high in iron, so you need to be careful with using it if you have a metabolic horse for sure. But if your horse's iron levels tend to be on the high side, be very, very careful with chlorella. Rosehips are a powerful antioxidant. They're very high in vitamin C, and they help flush toxins and support the immune system. There are a ton of rosehip supplements on the market right now. So nettle is also a good source of iron. So again, it should be used with caution in metabolic horses because, as we've already discussed, high iron can lead to insulin resistance, and nobody wants that. Nettle is high in calcium, chromium, magnesium, zinc, iron, cobalt, manganese, phosphorus, potassium, selenium, silicon, and niacin. Honestly, like it's easier to just list what nettle doesn't have versus what it does. It's also high in vitamins A and C and helps support a healthy immune system. I have never personally fed nettle to my horses, but everything that I have read about it, it's very popular and horses generally eat it very well. Milk thistle and dandelion can be used either separately or together. They both promote a healthy liver. They can be used long term to help flush the liver of toxins And milk thistle can be used in conjunction with dandelion to help rebuild the liver. Milk thistle can be used long term. Dandelion herbs should be used short term. So just keep that in mind if that is something that you want to try. Goldenrod is often considered a weed, but it's used for making teas and all kinds of tinctures for people, especially in, like Eastern medicine. It may help reduce pain and inflammation, and it helps support kidney health. Thuja Occidentals, it comes from cedar trees. It's a homeopathic remedy, and it rebalances the system. I have actually used Thuja directly after giving vaccinations to help reduce adverse reactions to those vaccinations. It works really well for that, and it works really well for helping to rebalance the system. Finally, zeolites. Zeolite is an odorless, tasteless, water-based spray that uses nano encapsulation to basically build a cage around heavy metals that allows your body to recognize the metals as foreign and allows it to excrete them. So this is one that I have used personally on my horses, so I highly recommend it. I have 2 horses, one gelding and one mare. The gelding I've had since he was a baby, and he's about to be 13, so I've had him his entire life, basically. The mare I just got this year, so I haven't had her quite as long. She was in training with me before I had her, so I've known her for about a year, but she's only been mine for a short time. So when I tested both of them, I had used a zeolite on my gelding before, and his heavy metals were actually all very, very low, except for strontium and vanadium. And those are the 2 toxic metals that zeolites will not flush. But all of the rest of his metals were actually quite low. And then I compared that with the mare, who has been living with the gelding. They get the same things. They live in the same pasture. Her heavy metal levels were actually much higher. And so after I got the test back, I kind of compared the 2. And then now she's been on zeolite since then, but she just wasn't on it before the test. So there is a difference with using zeolite versus not using zeolite. So as we come to the end today, I want to reiterate the importance of ensuring that your horse's mineral levels are balanced. So for the body to function optimally, it must maintain a very delicate balance of all the necessary minerals, and it is of utmost importance to your horse's health to ensure that the mineral intake is as close to balance as possible. So it's really important to get a hay analysis, a soil analysis, and a feed analysis if you are looking to really truly balance your horse's minerals. You are your horse's advocate, so you must do your due diligence and research their diet, to the best of your ability. There are plenty of horse nutritionists out there that will also gladly do it for you, as long as you pay them for your services. And then lastly, I want to stress the importance of the hair mineral analysis. So the hair mineral analysis provides one more piece to the puzzle that is your horse's health, and it's honestly really easy to do, especially given that you don't need a vet to do it. There are plenty of people that think that hair mineral analysis is a waste of time, and many vets are included in that group. I tend to believe that all information is helpful to completing the overall picture when it comes to the health of my horses. So as Dr. DeNicol Antonio says in the Mineral Fix, hair mineral analysis is a longer-term reflection of the mineral status in the blood. And Carrie Marsh says, hair tissue testing is the only accurate method for detecting heavy metals, as toxic metals are not found in blood except immediately after acute exposure. Toxic metals accumulate in soft tissues, not blood or the urine. And then Dr. Eleanor Kellen states that hair analysis as a method of detecting mineral poisoning dates back to 1857. Since then, improvement in test methods has led to greater accuracy and repeatability. So in terms of dietary levels of minerals, hair analysis is a little bit problematic. The minerals reach the hair the same way they reach other tissues in the body, which is through the blood. Therefore, the minerals pass through the liver before reaching the hair, and the liver can remove many minerals before reaching the hair. Hair mineral analysis also does not answer the all-important question why the mineral levels are not balanced, so more investigation is needed sometimes. Think of hair mineral analysis as the first step in the extensive process of ensuring your horse's diet is balanced and their nutritional needs are being met. On the flip side of hair analysis is a blood sample, which is usually thought of to be a more accurate assessment. However, keep in mind that a blood sample is literally just a snapshot in time of what's going on in the body, and levels can change directly after the blood sample is taken. The only completely static, definitive picture of what's going on, I like to say, in the body happens on necropsy, and honestly, nobody wants that picture. So here are some of the references. Well, they're all the references of all of the information that I've used for anybody that wants to do their own research. And anyone that wants further information on anything that was presented here today, please feel free to contact me. And if you want to order a test, you can go to petsdiag.com. And if you want to order a test for yourself, you can go to lifelinediag.eu. If you want to get the human test, the Pets Diag is for the horses and the dogs. Is that just USA? No, those should work both in Europe and in the USA. So I think you should be good on those websites. I don't know if Martin is still here. Maybe he can tell you for sure, but I'm pretty sure it works both in Europe and in the US. And I've never heard that chestnuts are more susceptible to deficiency. Honestly, I don't like to lump all one color in a group or all one breed in a group, because there are always anomalies within, every breed, every color, that kind of thing. I like to treat all of the horses that I've ever worked with as complete individuals. So look at your horse as a complete individual and don't compare him or her to anyone else. And I think that will be the best thing you can possibly do for your horse. And how would we know how much of the herbs to feed at a time? It's always best to start with the lowest dose first, and it's usually based on weight. But if you're looking to try any of the herbs that I recommended, there's plenty of information out there. If you have any trouble finding it, you always can email me. I'm totally fine with that, and I will help you find the answer to that question. It's usually based on weight. The zeolite stuff, always start with the lowest dose first and then work your way up, because you will have, especially as the body starts to flush the toxins, you will have detox symptoms come up. And like with the case of my gelding, he's very sensitive. He's huge. He's like 1,600 pounds. So he's a very big horse. He's actually on this last slide here. It's the bay. He's a very big horse, but he's very sensitive. So, the smallest dose possible for him with the zeolite. And I kept him on that for, I think, 3 weeks before I increased it. And he was just lethargic. He just was kind of sluggish, like he didn't act like he was sick or anything like that. He was just a little extra tired, which is kind of general detox symptoms. If you've ever done a detox yourself, you can kind of get like cold or flu-like symptoms as your body gets rid of those toxins. And then once you're through those symptoms, you generally start to feel better. So it's kind of the same for horses. And always, always, always with detox, slow is better. So if you think you can get it, if you have a plan to get it done in 3 weeks, take 9 weeks instead. Like just go extra slow and make it easy on your horse. That way you don't cause any other cascading problems down the line, because it all is very definitely a delicate system. So that's pretty much it for me. If anybody has any more questions, I'm happy to answer them the best I can. And thank you guys very much for hanging out with me today. Yes, zeolite in water and having it freely, it's totally okay. Especially if your horse is just by themselves. If your horse is obviously with other horses, it's going to be kind of a question of who's getting how much kind of thing. Zeolite in the water is totally fine. I've sprayed it on like a cookie, and I just like spray it on the cookie, shove it in my horse's mouth. They do fine that way. My horses are kind of dorks in that I can kind of do anything to them. And so, like, especially my gelding, he was actually an orphan. So, literally, I can do anything to him. So, I've just sprayed it directly in his mouth before, and he doesn't care about that either. So, given that it's so odorless and tasteless, they usually don't object to it any at all. Yeah, if you want a copy of the slides, sure, just email me and I'm happy to share the slides with anybody who wants them as well. And I know they're gonna put the whole webinar up either on YouTube or website or something or both. I think social media as well after this is all done today. So yes, you will absolutely have access to yep, see, there you go, both. So you will have access to all the slides. And just as a side note, all of the horses in the slides, except for the very first one on soil analysis, all of these are my horses or horses that I've worked with. So just kind of shows you how managing their diets correctly and making sure that they're well fed and all of the things can make them look pretty dang amazing. So yeah, they're all my horses, and these last two are actually my current horses, my bay and the black mare. So yeah. So yeah, I think that's good. You guys are very welcome. Like I said, thanks for hanging out with me today, and I think we're all good. If anybody has any further questions, always feel free to contact me. I'm sure Martin will be more than happy to answer any questions as well. So contact either him or me or somebody. Somebody will answer your question. I can guarantee it.
Donna, thank you very much for this webinar. I really appreciate your time. It was a huge part of your knowledge about the horse's health. So thank you very much one more time. And of course, I believe that we'll meet with Donna in the next few months to discuss further details about the role of micro and micro elements in our horse's health. So stay tuned. And of course, as we mentioned before, this webinar is available on our social media, Facebook, YouTube, and also on our website. And as you can read on the last slide, if you are interested in our test, we operate in the US, Europe, and even in Asia. So just free to contact with us in those cases. So thank you very much one more time, Donna. Thank you very much. I appreciate, and stay tuned. Thank you very much. Bye bye.